As the worst of the second wave begins to be in front of us, we can see the numbers of daily COVID cases coming down and hopefully some extent of unlocking of the economy panning out over the next few weeks. It's time to ask the question and take stock of what kind of an impact the second wave has had, especially on employment in the white-collar space. Simply put, what has happened to salaried jobs which had begun to show some extent of recovery between Jan and March this year after the second wave hit? Now, we know that CMIE data shows that unemployment rate in May has increased. It also talks about a loss of white-collar jobs. An estimate is doing the rounds that up to 4 to 5 million white-collar jobs might have been lost since the start of the pandemic or April 2020. But what is the current situation? What is the outlook? Are companies now beginning to hire again? At what levels? We are this evening going to get you the most definitive view on what is happening in the job market from the people who have their pulse on the finger of this. I'm joined today by Suraj Moraje. He's the MD and Group CEO of Quess Corp. Sashi Kumar, MD of Indeed India, on the show with us today. And Ishita Bandyopadhyay, MD of Aon Assessment Solutions, India and Southeast Asia, also on the show this evening. Welcome to all of you and thank you so much for speaking with us today. Let me start, Ishita, by getting your take on what is happening. Now, between March, April, May, I would say we were seeing the worst hit of the second wave. First week of June is when we've seen it receding. We didn't see, as compared to last year and the first wave, a lot of layoffs being announced from big corporates. But was there a hesitation in onboarding new people? What are the trends that you observed?
Well, good observations, and of course it is always going to be compared to the trends with last year, but what's really different for this year and the reason why we are not seeing a lot of hesitation in organizations hiring plans is because basis their learnings from last year, they have already made some systemic changes in terms of hiring and onboarding, which is why the hiring numbers particularly in the IT sector has not seen so much of a dip. In fact, it is still showing a growth prospect and the outlook is quite positive. However, of course, some of the industries where we know there has been worse hits in terms of tourism, airlines, things are still very conservative. But for this year's scenario, I would say that organizations are way more better prepared to continue with their hiring uptakes compared to last year.
Suraj, would you agree? I was looking over the data that Quess has put out, and you talk about entry-level jobs being hit the worst, down by about 11% because of difficulties of onboarding and training from remote locations. What sectors is that most present in?
Well, I think, first of all, if the first wave was an exclamation mark where I think everybody was sort of trying to figure out what the future looks like and a little bit surprised. I think the second wave was first a full stop and then a comma in the sense. I know it's grammatically poor, but in the sense that I think everyone was surprised how hard hit we were. And then I think people are moving on. I think we've entered the second wave in a very different frame of mind, Tamanna. I think we've entered the second. Most of corporate India wants to grow. It's early in the year. We still have our targets. We want to make sure that we do well. So I do think we're pushing ahead. I think to your question on entry-level positions, it is something we're seeing across the board. I think it's a combination of a couple of things. I think one, if you look at the IT space, a lot of the growth, and we're seeing massive growth. You would have seen that, for example, year on year in IT jobs, Monster's data shows that IT hiring is up almost 30%. But there, the demand is really for talent, which is maybe 3 to 4 years in, people who are trained in specific skills, be it specific platforms like SAP or Salesforce, or people who know who've had experience automating, digitizing. They are looking for people who can come in and hit the ground running. And I think the reason is that, the more entry-level skills are at this point, I think that clearly both in IT and non-IT, I think people are finding it difficult to train youngsters and to bring them into the company culture. It is very difficult to pull new people in. And if you look towards the West, you see, as the US starts to unlock, you see some of the larger companies there also saying, look, we have to come back to the office. Because I think after a year, you start realizing that it's difficult to steep people into your culture and way of working. So delayed, yes, hopefully not cancelled altogether. Hopefully we'll see even entry-level hiring pick up once the lockdown is behind us.
Sashi Kumar, IT has been an outlier all throughout. So when we are looking at an overview of the job market, of the appetite for employment and hiring by companies, we should talk about IT and then really talk about the rest, because that is the kind of sector where they managed to move everyone to remote location very quickly, very easily, and it really helped them in the sorts. Pandemic was a tailwind for most of the IT sector. Apart from IT, what is the kind of impact you are seeing of the second wave and in which sectors?
Yeah, so like, Suraj and Ishita spoke before me, IT has sort of weathered the storm once last year in 2020 March, once the entire surprise or the shock of the pandemic got over and people were able to figure out how they could operate even within this pandemic, specifically for IT. It's been on the rise, even as we went through the first wave and definitely through the second wave. Obviously, the ability to work remotely has helped, but the other thing is demand has picked up. From their business point of view, they're seeing new orders coming in, and this is mostly fueled by increasing need for companies to start digitizing, to start automating, and to start being able to serve their customers and connect with their employees remotely. Small and medium businesses, mid-market size companies in the West, whom the IT services company may mainly cater to, also started automating more as we went through the pandemic. And also domestically, we've seen domestic demand for IT as well go up as Indian companies, both large and mid-size, started automating and moving into working remotely. Also, the government has picked up on digitalization, so that has meant that there has been more demand from that sector. The government obviously isn't hiring people in IT, but they are giving work to private companies that are actually hiring on their behalf and executing projects. That's fueled the growth of IT. Other sectors that have been doing well, healthcare. And specifically, I think we need to also consider this neat divide that we have in our minds, IT and non-IT, as a thing of the past. As we go forward, most companies will trend to become IT in the sense that they will be hiring IT professionals. And that is something which we are seeing in healthcare. For example, some of the roles that have grown significantly, obviously healthcare companies have been hiring registered nurses, doctors, lab technicians, etc. But we've also seen an increasing demand for IT-related skills in healthcare companies. We're seeing that demand also happen in the financial sector. So this neat little divide between IT and non-IT is going to become a little blurred as we go into the future. Companies that run businesses need to adapt information technology and tech, or you will find tech companies adapting to these businesses and starting off those businesses. So that's literally what has led to growth. What has been the limiting factor has been jobs which require contact with people. BPOs, we've seen a decline in demand. We've seen a slight bit of decline in real estate. So sectors which require high level of contact have seen a decline in demand.
Suraj, give us a sense really of the kind of response we've seen from companies to the second wave. We saw a euphoria of sorts coming in around December 2020, December, Jan, March, when the revival was stronger than expected. We were seeing a V-shaped recovery, and that was beginning to reflect in the kind of employment opportunities and listings out there as well. Did you see any of that fading after the second wave, or was this not perturbed at all by the second wave?
I think the second wave, certainly, Tamanna, was far more personal in that many of us have had friends, family, loved ones impacted. So I think the first 3 or 4 weeks I would say, literally knocked the wind out of most people at a personal level. I think it was far more, if the first wave was intellectually disturbing, the second wave was emotionally taxing in India. Having said that, therefore, I think as we came into the second wave, frankly, the demand for labor was gangbusters. I think Shashi spoke about some of the IT skills. Frankly, you could not find, very tough to find good people, in-field salespeople, very difficult to find delivery people of high quality. I think across businesses were expanding. I think what's happening now is people are taking in a bit of breath. I do think that by and large, people are still hoping that Q2 and Q3 certainly are going to be great quarters. Of course, third wave notwithstanding, difficult to predict. But I think there's certainly a lot of hope that as we move towards the festive season, business will pick up, things will start to look up. And so, a couple of things different from a demand perspective this time versus last time. First of all, we've not had a single sort of material demobilization request from any customer to say, look, can you reduce the number of people? In fact, as you know, we're one of the largest payroll processing companies in the country for large enterprises. If you look at May versus March, payroll processed have been pretty much flat. So people have kept their, companies by and large have kept their people on board, whereas in the same period last year, pay slips fell by about over 5%. So I think that the people are holding, but also we're starting to see companies come back and say, look, we've got to get ready now to hire. And that could be, BFSI, telecoms, retail may be a little bit more sluggish. They want to see at what pace people come back to the stores. But across sectors, I think people do still, I think corporate India still wants to make it a good year. And that's going to require workers.
The question also is that is corporate India now preparing for people to come back to office? Ishita, some of the data that Aon has put out shows that many companies now have their post-pandemic system and guidelines in place. Those who can move positions permanently to work from home are putting those regulations in place as well?
Well, yes. I think what we are going to see is a shift of organizations looking at how they are managing their real estate, how they are managing remote working policies, etc. What we are also seeing that the kind of skill sets that they are looking for in people and how these individuals are able to manage work from a virtual environment as well, those are becoming quite critical. Particularly when we notice some of the hiring numbers, like Suraj was talking about payroll. When we work with organizations, we are constantly looking at their projection of hiring numbers. And we are seeing that the hiring projections are stable and consistent, and they are growing, which means that organizations are still positive and they are looking at absorbing a large number of people at a higher skill set. That's the difference. So they are looking at people who are more experienced, who can give like a more full stack service rather than parts of the jobs, which is why the younger generation's uptake is a little on the conservative side at this point of time. But organizations are definitely gearing up for a hybrid to a remote working way, and they want their employees and potential applicants to have that mindset as well.
Are the pay scales better, worse, or flat? What are you seeing, Sashi Kumar? In all of these sectors which are hiring, there is preparation. Suraj says by Q2, Q3, corporate India wants to get back in track and they want to prepare for it, right? This is the time when you prepare for expansion, so you want people to come on board. Are pay scales increasing in any way? Are we seeing an improvement in incomes or increments compared to last year, or are companies holding tight?
So I would say there is no uniform trend in this in the pay structures. In industries and skills for which there is demand and lack of supply, we are definitely seeing a rising pay structures. In places where industries that have been impacted badly, obviously pay has been stagnant, or even there's been cuts specifically around travel, tourism, around hospitality, etc. In many places, haven't been too many increments. But again, there are companies that have been able to make significant increments because a demand for talent and demand for qualified, skilled people has gone up, and there definitely is skill shortage in certain areas.
What is the plan as far as vaccinations are concerned? Suraj, let me come to you on this. First, two parts. I want your comment as well on the pay scales, that are pay scales going up? Are companies willing to hire at better rates? And of course, there will always be those segments where there is, the demand outstrips the supply. But largely, are pay scales going up? And I also want your view on how companies are positioning themselves as far as vaccination goes to get back on track.
No, sure. See, I think on the pay scales, it's certainly not exuberant. I think that at the end of the day, everyone is trying to manage their cost base and their risk, right? I think we're all hoping for the best. But frankly, you've got to be prepared for the worst. You don't know what the third wave looks like. And it's also very clear in a time like this, I think it's becoming clearer to us that the human cost is so high in a bad way. You don't want to lay off people in that time. So I think more and more people are trying to keep their cost structures under control. I think there will only be rich increments where people have no choice but to give rich increments. At the end of the day, I think, most of us are just hunkering down. And if I look at our customers as well, giving the minimum we have to give because there is inflation out there and, people do expect something, but it's certainly not exuberant, would be my observation. I think on the vaccinations, I would say that, again, we're entering, in the last couple of weeks, I would say we're entering a better phase. It has been a bit frustrating over the last 6 weeks to have not been able to get access to it. I think it has been a little bit unstructured. But I think now we are starting to see vaccinations availability go up. About 30% of our frontline workers in our operating asset management platform are already vaccinated. And those numbers are going up every day. I think it is getting streamlined quickly. And hopefully in the next few weeks, we'll see more and more happening. I do think many companies are stepping forward to sponsor them. I think in many cases, state, city governments for frontliners are stepping forward to organize government vaccines and camps. So really, it's a little bit, I think, for a large employer like us, it's taking whatever you get, wherever you get it, and just trying to mobilize as quickly as possible. But it feels like it's picking up momentum. And hopefully over time, the hesitancy also will come down at this point, especially in the grey and blue collar segment. There still is unfortunately hesitancy, which hopefully will come down as they see more and more people getting vaccinated safely.
Ishita, your take on the vaccine rollout plan, and we know, of course, of the large companies that are getting their employees and their workers vaccinated very quickly. They also have enough heft and muscle to try and corner this very scarce resources, which is vaccine right now, or tie up with private hospitals, etc. But across the board, what are the efforts in vaccinating as a path to business resumption?
Well, I think organizations, like you've said, are trying all in their power to make sure that not only our employees, but all their loved ones, as well as helps, etc., everybody's getting vaccinated. Because unless the vaccination happens, we know that the future is going to be badly impacted for certain cases. And I think what really resonated with me is what Suraj said. The first few weeks of this year's hit was very personal. So I've seen organizations like Aeon, we've mobilized every possible power that we have to make sure that all employees and their loved ones are getting vaccinated. I think right now we are in a position where we are also hearing other organizations which are leveraging these vaccination facilities. But I think what I'm not sure of is, are we still going to be able to cover a large volume of the population very fast within Q3? That's something that we need to look out for. And every possible way we should enable that as organizations for this country.
Just let's move to an outlook now. We know that quarter one of FY22 has been tough. You have the monthly economic report, which the government has put out today, also saying that they expect the worst of the economic hit to be over by quarter one. But does that give any kind of a relief or a push or momentum to job creation is the big question. Sashi, I want you to give us an outlook. Which sectors do you think will shine? And how long will it take for us to come back to the pre-pandemic momentum if that was the peg?
So as the pandemic recedes, it's not one day, right? I mean, it's not like today it's receded and from tomorrow it's all back to normal. It's going to be a slow process. And as we go through the process, we will see the economy picking up, demand picking up from certain sectors, and therefore industry being able to hire more. And this will be a slow process. I would imagine that companies that are able to hire for people who can continue to work remotely or have little need to come into office will see a revival in hiring, obviously subject to the fact that demand goes up. And and we will see high-touch industries not being able to sort of revive as fast. For example, hospitality, travel and tourism, retail, physical retail, not being able to revive as fast. Services most definitely will take time to revive. But what we are also seeing is a very fast adoption of technology by the services sector that's giving rise to gig workforces. For example, restaurants today are able to function, maybe not to what they were in terms of revenue earlier, but are able to function at some level because they're able to repurpose some of their headcount to deliver and also use services of third parties. Similarly with other services that people consume. That's something which we will see continuing and happening, and gig workforce growing and people being able to hire within that space. So in short, we will see export-led, work-from-home friendly companies being able to hire faster. And as we slowly defeat the pandemic, we will see other sectors open up. I think it's very hard to put a date at this moment to when we will be completely back at pre-pandemic levels, because that depends on a lot of factors that we are still unaware of. But yes, slowly, I think we are going to see a revival happen over maybe Q3 and Q4 of this financial.
I want to get a sense, Suraj, what is happening with the gig economy? What's happening with gig workers, with freelance kind of work? Because the gig economy was going strong and was really the best thing on the horizon for a lot of employees and employers before the pandemic really hit. We saw it get a boost to some extent after first wave. What is the current status and the level of demand there and the jobs that are available there?
So it's certainly something that's growing, right? I think that, and you probably want to break it up into, let's say, gig economy workers who are in the delivery/driving space and people who are outside. I think the delivery/driving space will continue to grow, whether there's a pandemic or not, because I think ordering things home, getting things delivered has become a way of life now and will continue. I think that's the new normal. The part of gig which is outside of delivery, which is, for example, people who go and acquire channel partners, people who go and do marketing tasks, people who go and do part-time survey tasks, and that is growing very healthily. I think what is happening in the corporate world, and I'm talking outside of IT now, Taman, I think the IT gig economy and the white-collar gig economy is slightly more, I think that's secularly growing. I think in general, I would say enterprises in India are getting, as they kind of start scaling up activity, are becoming more discerning around where do I hire a permanent worker, where do I hire a temporary worker, and where do I get a gig worker? And the name of the game really is around risk mitigation. I don't want to bring a permanent worker if I don't need one. And ideally, if I have a task, which is an extreme peak, like just a weekend task or a project for 6 weeks, where I've got to roll out something, enter a new city, for example, I would probably use gig there. So we do have an investment in a gig platform called Taskmo, and that has been pre-pandemic doubling its revenues every quarter. So I think that space is growing very healthily. But it's not it can't grow infinitely. There will always be a mix in the labor force, and you can't have everyone on gig because by definition, a business needs a culture, and it's your perm and to some extent your temp who define what that culture and what that ethos is.
Ishita, I want a forward-looking sort of outlook from you. What is your sense? Do you see hiring pick up by Q3, Q4, more jobs being out there in the market, or will we have to wait for a larger and wider spread of vaccinations to really see some solid recovery?
Well, I think I would stick to the point that we made right at the beginning. It's of course sector dependent. For the IT sector, like we said, because of its inherent nature, it is going to be able to continue with its hiring trends, which is quite strong and positive even in Q3 and Q4. So what has happened, of course, that these organizations have already adopted the virtual way of hiring. They have adopted onboarding in a very seamless manner, which means that they can hire anytime, anyhow now. So that's going to remain strong from a hiring outlook. Whereas certain sectors like tourism, education, hospitality, airlines, infrastructure, real estate, automobile, their hiring uptake is going to be very much dependent on the technology adoption that has already taken place in the organization. If the organization has already done a good technology uptake in terms of the hiring and onboarding abilities of the organization, then they will continue to hire conservatively, but continue to hire in a positive way. But we are definitely going to see the uptake being slow for these sectors.
Absolutely. The uptake will be slow. It is going to be a tough couple of quarters coming ahead. What we can take some relief from and some hope from is that job losses have not been as deep as last time. But yes, job hirings or new hirings are continuing, perhaps at a slower pace, and it depends on what's happening from sector to sector. Thank you so much to all of you for joining us today and giving us such a deep and comprehensive idea of the employment trends after the second wave.
Thank you.
Thank you.